power of agenda setting when empathy meets motivation, how to discover if your client is ready to change, and how to empower them to do so. In our last video, How Values Create Resistance to Recovery, we explored Dr. David Burns' tool, Positive Reframing, which is unpacking the hidden values behind your emotions so you can see all the good reasons your resistance is there rather than thinking resistance is something wrong with you or your clients. That episode was aimed at helping the viewer, but I trust the points came across for clinicians to use as well. Today's episode is especially for therapists and feeling great coaches who want to learn how to implement agenda setting or assessment of resistance with their clients in a session. Reminder, clients never treat mental health illness, and if they claim to, you need to throw them out right away. But some of the tools that we use are interchangeable and they can help clients face in their challenges toward goal success. So, if you're not a therapist or a coach, stay with me. You'll discover how these same tools can help you notice when you're not quite ready to change something in your own life and how to approach that with compassion instead of pressure. Agenda setting is the bridge between therapeutic connection and recovery goal formation. It's the transition from empathy to change. Now, it's important to remember empathy continues all throughout working with a client. These are not completely separate steps where we do them once and never look back. Rather, the tools are additive and the framework is a guide as we move forward from session to session. In this video, I'm going to attempt to cover the entire agenda setting process, which typically takes me anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 sessions with a client. And I also want to point out, I may use coaching and therapists and therapy and all these words interchangeably, but please remember they are completely separate and distinct. And it's such a challenge when explaining Team CBT and the work that I do because there's so much overlap. And that's because we're human beings and human connection actually goes a long way in helping people. And sharing what works for you with your friends, for example, may actually help them on a process of recovery. It doesn't mean you're a therapist because you're a good friend. So I hope you'll give me some grace there. Again, I think it's really important to follow all the rules and regulations in wherever you live. So that caveat in mind, I know beginning clinicians could take up to 3 sessions to accomplish agenda setting. That's fine. It may depend even how long your sessions are, how quickly this happens. So just give yourself some grace. The 5 steps to transition from empathy to methods, that's the the E and the M, the ETEAM and team, are invitation, and that is the client ready to get to work? Do they need more empathy and connection? And what problem do they want help with? Number 2 is moment in time. This is getting specific so we can dig deep rather than stay on the surface. And it grounds us from bouncing all over the place and not really addressing the core issue. Number 3, the miracle cure question. What category of tools will we use? Mood, habit, relationship tools? Will we do internal work or external behavior modification? Step 4, addressing outcome resistance. What are all the good reasons not to change? Remember positive reframing? And what does it show about their values? And step 5, addressing process resistance. What is the client willing to do to move forward on their healing journey? Then we include in step 5, we move on to create a client-specific recovery circle or circle of hope. And I'll talk more about that in my next video on methods, called the M of team. So there are various tools that we use at various steps. So let's unpack each of these 5 steps and the tools used in each one. Step 1, the invitation. As mentioned, the first step in agenda setting is the invitation. But even before we do that, we need to check in with the client and make sure they feel 100% heard and understood. In team, we only issue an invitation after we have an A or A+ in empathy, or it might be a 20 out of 20 on the evaluation of the session form. For example, I might ask a client, if you were to grade me right now on how understood and supported you feel, and if I'm getting you right, what would that be? A B plus, C minus? Is there anything I'm missing? If the client says an A, or they might say something like, no, nothing missing, you totally get it. I've been doing this long enough that I get a sense of when to ask this question, but I don't always get it right, hence why I ask it in the first place. Sometimes clients respond, yeah, you're getting me pretty good, but I haven't told you about what I went through this week with my sister. And at this point, I know the client wants to share more about what's going on for them, and or I haven't totally gotten them, and there's something missing in our connection and working together. So at that point, I do more of the 5 secrets, the empathy, and I wait until I sense a shift again. Could be a pause, maybe they're repeating the same story or just adding a lot of detail to the same one. Whatever the case, I check again and ask for that grade until I get an A. And I'll admit I don't ask this question over and over. Sometimes I might wait till after the session and look at the evaluation of session form, because that'll have, the empathy scores. And let me say, this gets easier, much like we're teaching our clients to face uncomfortable feelings. It's important for us to also demonstrate facing uncomfortable feelings. And it doesn't feel great to ask a client, give me a grade. It just feels kind of awkward. And some clinicians even feel like, whoa, you're kind of disrupting the empathy flow. Well, yes, you are. It's kind of the point. The point is, like, we're going to kind of maybe start to move from simply talking to creating an outline of how we can help this client move forward, right? So if you feel awkward asking the question, you can even disclose this in a very warm, genuine way. You might say something like, I feel a little awkward and silly to ask, but I wanted to check in and make sure I'm really understanding, getting you, because that's really important that you feel heard and understood. So if I were to ask you to give me a grade right now on how I'm doing with understanding you and you feeling supported and heard, would that be like a B or C minus? What would that be? I mean, another option, like I already mentioned, is instead of verbally asking this grade in the middle of a session, you could wait, for after the session, maybe even 2 or 3 sessions, and then check on the measurement tool, the evaluation of the session form. These forms are available in David's toolkit. I'm not going to go into that there. I've talked about the toolkit before. Maybe I'll do a whole video on that one. Anyways, you might also use some kind of other survey method with a client that they fill in after a session. In the case of team CBT, we call it the ETS. We're looking for 20 to 20 just in the empathy section. We don't expect to get 100% on the entire survey. Obviously, it might not be helpful for a client just getting empathy. In fact, that would be surprising if they thought that it was an amazing total session when they didn't get any tools to help them on their journey. So, and again, if this is like something you're like, what is she talking about? You might have to go back and watch the video on testing, or feel free to email me any questions or go to my website. So let's now assume you've gotten this 20 out of 20 A plus in empathy and you're ready to ask the invitation. Before we do that, let's look at the parameters of the invitation so you can make it relevant to your style and language and way of being. So the invitation helps us answer 2 vital questions. Number 1, does the client want help yet? And 2, which problem do they want help with first? So first part, does the client actually want help now? Then if yes, we're going to do, we sometimes offer sort of a multiple choice invitation, and then they can pick from that. So side note, if the issue the client is presenting during empathy or intake involves relationships or habits, I would use a paradoxical invitation for that, and that's coming later in the series. There are 2 main ways to offer invitation. I think I alluded to this earlier, simple versus multiple choice. So a simple one would be sort of a 2-step invitation. Multiple choice combines the 2 steps in one go. In team, we always invite the client while we sit with open hands. And what that means is we never push or direct a client to get to work. We stay open to the possibility they may need more empathy rather than action. And this keeps the relationship safe, collaborative, and pressure-free. We want the client to always feel like they're in the driver's seat. We want them to be in the driver's seat. So here's an example of how this invitation might sound. I'm wondering if now would be a good time to get to work, or if there's more you need to share with me. Either is fine. This communicates warmth and respect for the client's timing. It says, I'm here with you, not trying to control where we go next or how fast we get there. Sitting with open hands equals no pressure and full respect. Client in the driver's seat. For non-therapists watching, you can apply this same spirit to yourself. When you notice you're struggling, try asking, do I even want to work on this right now? Or do I need to just feel my feelings or get more understanding first, or even understand myself and what my thoughts are right now? This small shift can prevent you from being a big bully toward yourself into like self-improvement before you're actually ready. So the second part of this simple invitation would be, what does a client want to work on? And that's where we would offer the multiple choice invitation. Now, like I said, you could do the multiple choice invitation and the simple one at the same time. I'm hoping this is going to come out clearly. Just keep in mind there's like 2 steps to the invitation. You can separate the steps or combine them. Okay. So the multiple choice portion sounds something like this. Great. Okay, you'd like to get to work. Well, would you like to work on the sadness you told me about your loss? There's the anxiety about work, or your frustration with your partner, or maybe there's something else you haven't even mentioned yet. Which one of these would you like to start with? This helps the client to focus on one issue when there's several on the table. And I even do sort of goal setting with the client, like we kind of put them in an order and they're free to rearrange that later. So that's kind of the 2 pieces. Now, what if the client doesn't accept the invitation? Then what do we do? Well, I mean, I think I kind of already alluded to this again. I feel like I've said alluded a couple times. But if the client either declines the invitation, that's totally fine. We just return to empathy, right? And very quickly, we don't even address it. We don't go like, oh, sounds like you're not ready to move on. Definitely don't do that because it sounds like you're judging them for not moving on, right? Sounds like, oh, you are ready to move on, but the client isn't. No, no. Just if they start talking about, yeah, I'd like to get to work, but this week my sister came over and we end up in this fight, then you just go, oh, sounds like it was a really stressful week because your sister came over and you went to this fight. Tell me more about that. That's you just fall right back into whatever they're talking about, rather than saying, oh, sounds like, you'd like to talk more about your sister and not ready to actually get to work. That's fine. Do I have you right? Like, don't do that. Okay, that's really important because that is no longer as open hands as it can. You want to be as open as possible so the client can be in the driver's seat. One of the issues, especially in therapy, but also happens in coaching, is the client takes their cues from you, even really subtle ones. And so you can manipulate. I'm going to use that word. I don't use it lightly. You can manipulate a session to go in the direction you think it should go in, rather than the client having full control, because they're subject to all the little nuances and hints that you might have. So it's just really important for you to be really in tune with your language and how you're presenting to the client. You may not feel like you're being judgy at all. You might not feel like you're directing the show, but any kind of hint of, oh yeah, we should go forward. No. Think of it this way. You want to be 100% sure the client is actually convincing you they want to move on from talking and from sharing and from disclosing all the things that they need to do in that moment. Okay. I will say that obviously I've already done this in an intake session. If you do intake sessions, you probably have already got a bit of a goal list, right? And so I know kind of what my client wants to work on. So when I go to do the multiple choice invitation, I generally just list out those goals, right? And I get them to pick one to start with. And I will say, having said all that about the client in the driver's seat, there may be times when it's best to start with a particular goal. That just, unfortunately, is the way it is. It may be beneficial for a client to work on X before they work on Y. Let me give you an example. Client might have severe depression, in which case they'd be seeing a therapist, not a coach, but right. So anyways, but they also have social anxiety. They want to get married. They want to look for a partner. Now, I would direct them. I would encourage them to work on the depression first, but I'm not going to do that in a subtle, manipulative way. I'm actually just come out and state it. I'm just going to come out and say, listen, I've worked with several clients and I've had depression myself. And I know it is very hard to be motivated to do anything when you're depressed. You feel low, you feel bad about yourself. It's hard to have any kind of joy, pretty hard to develop sort of a casual friendship with someone, be bubbly if you have depression, because we want you to have this genuine experience and not have to put on some kind of persona as you deal with social anxiety, as you deal with meeting people. So I would highly recommend we work on the depression first. What are your thoughts about the order of how we should address these things? Okay, so I'll stop there. Something like that. That's kind of maybe how I would address it. Another example may be a client has a severe addiction, and that would get in the way of them moving forward or even learning tools. If they're high 20 hours out of the day, it can be very difficult for them to do the cognitive work. So this is where clinical judgment will come in and why certain issues need to be done by a therapist, right? Anything that is above just I need some tools to help me function better. That's kind of the coaching realm. I want to move forward. I read this great book called Feeling Great by Dr. David Burns, and I just want some help and some guidance working through the book. That's what a Feeling Great coach does. But for actual illness and recovery for depression and anxiety, we want to use that in the therapy realm because those clinicians will have some intuition and some training on what might need to come first. Another example would be patients with bipolar or schizophrenia. We want to make sure that they're medication compliant before moving on to psychotherapy. Okay. All right, so let's say they accept the invitation. And so now we go on to step 2, which is choosing a moment in time. Once a client picks a problem, we get specific in team. One moment in time when that problem felt very strong or intense. It doesn't have to be the most strongestness. Let's make up words here. It doesn't have to be the highest level of intensity, but it needs to feel pretty strong. Without specificity, without this moment in time, we can stay in a vague mire that tends to be very difficult to wade through. When I get to the root of the problem, then the client has the skills they need to move forward. And in order to get to the root, we have to dig down, we have to dig deep, which in Team CBT is done through being really specific and sticking with a really specific moment in time. This might seem a little counterintuitive, and clients and therapists ask me all the time, but there's so much going on in their lives. What about their childhood? What about past traumas? What about their current relationships? There's so much nuance to a person's mental health, and 100% I agree. There may be many issues to address, but if we try to deal with them all at once, we can end up going around in circles and not really getting anywhere, or at least it significantly slows down the process of moving forward. On the other hand, if we stick with one moment in time, we can unpack it so much, so deeply, that perhaps even more than discussing at length their entire life, we can address some really deep core issues. Let me give you kind of an analogy. So I struggle with fatigue. I have fibromyalgia, and the doctor wanted to rule out low iron. So ordered a blood test. Now, did she need to test all of my blood and drain me dry? No. They just need a sample, right? The nurse takes a sample and they do an in-depth analysis on that one sample. Why? Well, because one vial of blood is going to be the same as all the other blood in my body in that moment. And that's true for our personality, our mental acuity, and emotional aptitude. We are who we are every moment of every day. And if we unpack one moment intimately and deeply, we're going to reveal who that person is and where they struggle. This is different from, I think a lot of people see like the moment in time or getting really specific or like negative thoughts on a page, like traditional CBT, and it's just not, because we really want to dive deep. We want to just kind of, it's almost like put the brakes on so you can go faster. So with this moment in time, we have worksheets called the daily mood log for mood work, relationship journal, and habit log. So how do we do this step? How do we do this moment in time? We might ask the client something like, can you tell me about a recent moment when you felt this way most intensely? And I'm just saying this way, I might, if they've already told me what it is, I will say, you felt this anxiety or when you felt depressed, but I might even just leave it open to this way because often and most likely the client actually has several feelings that they're feeling in that moment, right, on their daily mood log. So usually I just say that way because we've just completed this upsetting event moment and they've just told me a little bit about that. So in team, we use these kind of like little structures to capture all this information and pinpoint what's going on for the client in that exact situation. And for the rest of this video, I'm going to focus on mood work because there are different processes and tools for habits and for relationships. So let's stick with mood work. So we start filling in this daily mood log to record and document all the details of that moment in time, which we call the upsetting event. Who they were with, what they were doing, how they were feeling, what were their negative thoughts. The upsetting event can be something quite catastrophic and life-changing, or it could simply be waking up in the morning. The only criteria is that it feels real and relevant to the client with the intensity of the emotion or symptom they're looking to change. The daily mood log is great and it was handy because it lists the emotions already and they can just circle them and it's pretty user friendly. If you'd like a copy of the daily mood log, it's available free on Dr. David's website, feelinggood.com/DML. Okay, I'll do a whole video on the daily mood log down the road, but it's great because we can track what's working and what's not working. We add metrics. So again, if you want a copy, you want to follow along for the rest of this video, jump over to David's website, feelinggood.com/DML. For viewers doing self-work, you can try this exercise out, but even if you're a clinician, I highly recommend you do some yourself, like on these. All right, so think of a moment when you felt down or blue or worried or anxious or all of the above and fill in the daily mood log. I'll wait. No, I'm just kidding. But you could pause the video if you like and go ahead and do that. Once we have that moment, we need to know what kind of help the client would like. Do they want to feel better about the situation, change something about themselves, hope the world will just change? To unpack this, we go to step 3, the miracle cure. We ask this miracle cure question to clarify, what does a client truly want? If a miracle were to happen tonight and your problem disappeared, what would you notice tomorrow morning? Or I might ask something like, if you got exactly what you wanted out of our session today, what would that be? So miracle cure equals the desired outcome. This question kind of reveals the goal behind the goal. You could even add an acid test if we're not sure the client is understanding about what they have control over and what they don't. Because sometimes clients will just say, oh, I wish I, never felt anxious ever again. And that might be something we can't offer on the menu. So this is a good opportunity to talk about what we can and can't help our clients with. Also, some clients will think the situation has to change for them to feel better. They refuse to believe that they would have any control over their feelings outside of the world around them. So the acid test would be something like, would you want to feel better even if nothing else changed? And this helps them to not only, well, the question itself is a bit leading, right? And because you're offering this, basically in this question, you're offering them to have happiness and feeling good or positive. You might even say, would you like to have peace and joy, even if nothing else changed? So a lot of times I will pick the opposite to things they've put on their daily mood log. I'll pick kind of the opposite words so that's relevant to the client. But we're really wanting to distinguish between internal change and external control. Now, there are times where a client wants to change the external circumstances, and we might be able to help them in that journey, right? We might be able to facilitate that depending on our specialties and training. But at the same time, I want clients to be aware of the fact that they can be happy based on internal change. And it's good for clients to see they can improve their lives in different ways, but how we go about those will be different tools. Anger management is one of those areas where we want to do the internal work so the client doesn't feel so angry so often. But we'd also want to do some behavior modification tools so the client doesn't escalate and hurt someone else. Again, clinical judgment is needed in some of these situations, and I will leave that up to you. For those watching for personal use, try asking yourself the same thing. What would it look like in that new morning when everything is just the way you would like it? How would that feel? What would it look like? What would be different? Once we have clear direction on where we're going on this client's journey, we can add step 4, outcome resistance. So now we have this moment in time, we know which direction the client wants to go in. We need a kind of a transition point to address resistance. And this is the magic button. So I would ask something like, hey, if I had a magic button and we could press it and make all these painful feelings disappear instantly, would you press it? If they say yes, great. We're ready to go on to the next step, which I might say something like, well, of course, I'd want to push that button for you too, but I don't have a magic button. And in some ways, I'm kind of glad I don't, because some of these really painful emotions say some amazing things about you. And they even have some advantages and benefits. Would you, I know that sounds kind of weird, but would you be willing to explore those with me right now? If they say no, that's okay too. You can inquire why they said no. Perhaps they're pragmatist and they're like, there's no such thing as a magic button. Or maybe they've listened to one of David's podcasts or read one of his books and they already understand there's lots of good reasons to feel the way they do. Either way, you can guide them toward positive reframing. Yeah, I wouldn't want to push that button either. Let's explore why it's important for us to hold off washing away all our feelings at the press of a button. Would you be willing to try a tool with me that looks at the advantages and benefits as well as what it says about these positive and awesome? By the way, we don't use the magic button for habits or relationship. This button is only for mood work. Okay. And then from there, we go right into positive reframing. And if you haven't seen that video yet, I do a whole walkthrough of positive reframing. Watch the previous video, How Values Create Resistance to Recovery. And it will take you step by step through positive reframing and show you how to turn resistance into motivation. Here's just a really quick refresher. Let's consider the upsetting event, my car broke down on vacation. We can imagine feeling sad and disappointed, maybe even a little discouraged. We might have thoughts like, bad things always happen to me, or planned so hard, this shouldn't have happened. What might be good about feeling that way in that specific moment? And what does it show about our values as positive and awesome? Well, I mean, first of all, it's realistic. We're excited to go on a trip, and now we have to deal with this breakdown. It actually shows how excited we really were because, if you weren't excited, you wouldn't actually be coming down from a high, right? It shows how much we were looking forward to spending time with our family, which that in turn shows how important relationships are to us. It protects us from being too optimistic about the car getting fixed right away. Here we are, broke down the side of the road, kind of gives us a little protection from getting too optimistic and just thinking, oh, everything's going to be fine. And then it isn't fine. And then we end up with more feeling even more bad. We're not kind of deluding ourselves by some kind of toxic positivity. Okay, I could go on and on and on, make a long list, but I'll direct you again to the video we already did. It goes into great detail on this one tool. I do feel a little nervous moving on and only touching on this so briefly because this tool is a key to the whole process. And so like positive reframing is like the core of everything else I'm talking about in this video. And this video is almost pointless without positive reframing, but it's so in depth that I had to do a whole video on that. And I wanted this to just be like the structure of agenda setting and how to move through that agenda setting flow. So, all right, we have a long list of good reasons to feel the way we do. Then we can issue the pivot question. Given all these advantages and positives, why might you still want to change? There's lots of ways to ask this pivot question where we pivot from all the good reasons to not change to why the client might want to change how they feel. And we can even do this tool called externalizing the resistance. It's a role play technique where the client argues for change, kind of drives home the reasons why they'd want to continue moving forward. But I'm going to save that for a separate video. Okay. So now what? Now after the pivot question, we do the magic dial. So we had a button, which doesn't exist. It's just a thought experiment. And then we have a magic dial, which kind of exists. And I'll explain it in a minute. So looking at all the good things these emotions offer you, we can go to the goal column on the daily mood log and actually write down what might be a healthy, good amount of sad, blue, down, and depressed to keep for this moment in time, my car breaking down. What might be realistic and helpful? Then we go through all the emotions the client has already rated. In place of these, for habit work, we do a triple paradox. And for relationships, we do the blame CBA. Step 5, dealing with process resistance. Great. The client doesn't have some subconscious reason to hold on to their past negative thoughts and emotions. But are they willing to do the work on this road to recovery? This is process resistance. Sometimes clients want help, but they resist doing the work for various reasons. That's process resistance. There will be things a client has to do to get better. They might have to see you regularly. They might have to do some kind of homework to implement the tools in the session and so on. It makes sense, by the way, our clients are resistant or even confused by this. For decades, we've all watched TV therapy where someone just sits on the couch and talks about all their problems while the therapist makes some sweeping, pivotal comment that changes this person's trajectory. Wouldn't it be great if every therapist just went to school for 8 years and all of a sudden was an expert in human behavior and psyche and could just figure something out by listening to the rantings on the couch? Unfortunately, this is not a reality. Don't get me wrong. I've worked with clients where I've said some comment and that really resonated with them and they felt like they've just had like this aha moment and inspirational change in mindset. And I'm sure many other coaches and therapists have had this experience as well. But it's actually pretty rare and it doesn't happen with all my clients for sure. And even with the clients it does happen with, it's usually like once or twice in working with them. Really, what I think is an even better outcome is when a client has these inspirational moments, these aha moments themselves. They are empowered to make their own change. They're really their best tool is themselves. We just gotta help them get out of their own way. And that's because the greatest cause of a client suffering is generally themselves. Now, I'm sure I'm gonna get all kinds of comments, so I wanna try to address some of the concerns as I'm saying this out loud, right? Like, I think viewers will have, and definitely people have made this comment to me in training, and that is, are we blaming the victim when we give them tools to change the way they think? Like they really had this traumatic event. They really had this horrible childhood. They really had these things that were happened to them that have shaped them. And in some ways, yes, it happens. I'm ashamed to say, even in the back of my own mind, I've had a time where I was like, oh, this person, if they would just change the way they're thinking and stop blaming this other person, they would be so much better off. And that kind of mindset is extremely antagonistic and hurtful. So let me give you an analogy to better put this all in perspective. Imagine you're driving down the road and someone is driving towards you, and all of a sudden they swerve into your lane and smash into your car. You manage to limp your car over to the side of the road. There you sit. So, whose responsibility is it to get your car fixed? Well, it's your car. It's actually your responsibility. But who's to blame for the accident? Yeah, it's the other person. They swerved into your lane. You were going in the right direction. You were in the right, and they were not. Now, the other person might have done it intentionally, some kind of weird death wish or just being hurtful, or they might have done it accidentally. They might have had a stroke or fallen asleep and something else out of their control caused them to hurt you, which is often the case. Sometimes parents put their best foot forward and still hurt their children at the end of the day. Anyways, okay, I'm digressing again. Listen, while it's the other person's fault, and we hope they have some kinds of insurance, we wouldn't really want them to be responsible to fix our car. I mean, would you want the person who hurt you be the one who's in control of how you get the best help? That's not in your best interest. And I want to keep that responsibility. I'm me, and I want the responsibility of how I get fixed myself, right? So, in other words, we want to empower clients to move forward toward recovery, even though it was not their fault they're in the situation. period. Okay. Now, I do have clients where a good percentage of their issues are their fault. We know some accidents might be 50-50. So I just hope that it's clear, though, when we provide tools to help someone move forward in lasting change, we are not saying it is their fault that they need help in the first place, right? Okay. So how do we address this resistance to the process of change? Well, in order to do that, we have to look at what the client will need to do to change. And this depends on the client's situation and what they're trying to achieve, what kind of work they're wanting to do. For example, in clients with really low depressive mood, they won't feel like doing things that we're asking them to do. So we might ask them to do things even when they don't feel like it. There may be some behavioral tools that they're going to have to do. For anxiety issues, we might have to get a client to face their fears and do things that are not comfortable. You get the idea. I'm not going to go into all the different kinds of tools that we might use or homework we might give out, but you kind of need to know that a little bit because that's going to be part of this process resistance. Because there's 3 tools we use in addressing process resistance. The first one is called dangling the carrot. This is where we explain to the client what they're going to work toward and that you can help them on their journey. Listen, if you can't help them on your journey, you should be referring them out. So this shouldn't be something that feels like sort of like manipulative or like, oh, I'm trying to sell myself. No, you should have the tools to help this client move in the direction that they need to go in, or you should be referring them out. So the dangling the carrot is basically identifying these are the tools I think might be helpful. We might say, I'll give you some examples in a bit, but I'll keep it general for now. Okay. Now, how much assurance you give in this carrot must be qualified by your own experience, skill level, and training, and it should not be overstated or make any false promises, right? So it could be something very simple like, I have some tools that can help you feel more peace and calm, right? Number 2, or not number 2, but the second tool we use is the gentle ultimatum. And this is where we describe in brief what the client will have to do to implement the solution and that it requires some work on their part. So I might say something like, of course, this will be catered toward the client and what they need to do. You're going to be required to do some readings in a book, some worksheets between sessions, and maybe even facing some painful emotions. Okay. And then the third piece of this is sitting with open hands. We want to make it clear to the client they have every right to walk away if they don't like what you have to offer or they think it's too big of an ask. So I might say, it's totally okay if you're not ready to do this kind of homework. How do you feel about what I'm asking? So together, it might sound something like, so let's take a client who's coming and they're socially anxious. It might sound something like, John, I have tools that can really help you feel calm in social situations. Oh, just a minute. Okay. Let me give you an example. So John has social anxiety. John, I have some tools that can help with social anxiety. I have had a lot of social anxiety myself, and I've used these tools to help me feel comfortable around other people. And I want to share those with you, but they will require some implementation and some things on your part. I'm going to have to ask you to face some of your fears, and I know that's not comfortable. You'll also have to do, oh, sorry, we have to redo it. Let's take John. John has social anxiety. So let's take John. John has social anxiety. So John, I have some tools that can help you feel more comfortable around strangers and help you to feel empowered in social situations. I know what it's like to feel awkward in social situations, and I want that for you too. But it does require some work on your part. There's no magic wand that I have that just fixes it. In fact, there are tools you're going to have to implement to each day in between our sessions to really solidify our work together. We call this homework, but that's something that's non-negotiable. We kind of have to do that to have full recovery. How do you feel it? But no, I mean, I get if that just sounds like that's too much to ask, and I definitely would work with you on what you feel comfortable doing, but I want to push that comfort level. And yet that's not right for everyone. Not everybody wants to do that kind of work. How do you feel about what I'm asking? Okay, that was, excuse me, just a minute. I might also do an analogy. So let me give you a third example. Let's take Susie, who is feeling depressed. No, sorry, that was itchy. Okay, let's give you a third example. Let me give you a third example. Let's take Susie, who's just feeling really kind of unmotivated and inferior. So it might sound something like, Susie, I struggled with inferiority, and I have some tools that help give you some confidence and feel better about yourself and maybe even give you a little motivation. But I gotta say, you'll have to do things between sessions. And you can imagine if you wanted to learn to play the piano and you went to a piano teacher and they said, listen, you don't have to practice at all. Just come once a week to learn piano from me, and I'll play the piano for you. And then, as you listen, you'll have some kind of experience where eventually you'll be able to play the piano. We think that was crazy, right, Susie? Well, that's kind of how coaching and works as well. I this is your journey, your work, and I'm just here to kind of guide you along the process. So there will be things you have to do, kind of like when you're learning piano. There's things that I just can't do for you, but I get that that's not for everyone, and maybe this feels like you were looking for someone who had more expertise and skill that they could just sort of like tell you what to do. And I just want to know, what are your thoughts about doing this kind of homework, this kind of work that I'm asking of you? Or was that maybe not what you were expecting? Just I'd like to hear more, because it's totally okay if this sounds like this is not for you. Okay, so there you go. Whoops. Sorry, my nose gets so itchy. Now, there's an additional tool if the client doesn't want to do the homework at all, and this is called the fallback position. What this looks like varies from clinician to clinician. So some therapists will just do more empathy and then revisit process resistance down the road. Other clinicians can offer a different modality that doesn't require homework. That maybe they don't do team CBT. Team CBT requires homework, period, and stop. But maybe they do something else like psychodynamic approach or IFS or some other systems. I'm trying to ad lib. So some clinicians may offer another modality that doesn't require homework, like the psychodynamic approach. Myself, I will do some empathy and see if there's another problem the client wants help with. But I don't, I do, I don't like the way I wrote this. Myself, I will do some empathy and see if maybe there's a different problem the client wants help with. But at the end of the day, I do remind them that unless a client is willing to implement tools between sessions, because I've made it clear on my website, I've made it clear during the consultation, the free consultation, and by a third time, I've done it during the intake. So by the time we get to this place and working together, the client is well aware that homework is non-negotiable when working with me. And I'm happy to refer clients out, but that's my process. Again, this will be different for different therapists, different coaches, what their fallback position is. But for me, I just don't feel I could ethically offer tools of any kind without the client doing some of this work in between sessions, because I want them to be successful without me. And it's, again, much like the piano teaching situation. I can't do that for them. All right. Once a client has agreed to do their part, we have one last tool in the agenda setting process, and that is the circle of hope or recovery circle. I hope I pushed record. Yeah. The recovery circle. The recovery circle, or circle of hope, which is a newer name for this worksheet, is a tool where we list all kinds of methods or tools that might address the symptom in one specific negative thought. So we start off by asking the client to choose one of their negative thoughts from the daily mood log, and we put that negative thought in the center of the recovery circle. And then we come up with about 15 to even up to 30 methods that might work to address this thought. This tool is used to both inspire hope as well as prepare the client for failure. It normalizes the process that we're going to try some things and they're not all going to work. And at the same time, inspiring confidence that you can help them, that even if we make some mistakes along the way, they aren't truly mistakes. They're part of this journey of finding the real tools that would work for them. And that you don't just have this like cookie cutter approach or formula you've memorized and just dish out to all your clients. This tool is based on the Team CBT philosophy, fail as fast as you can, because we're all human beings, both the clinician and the client. There are no perfect formulas that work 100% of the time. This tool provides structure on where to go next, but it's flexible. You can kind of pick around. You don't even have to do one tool after the next, right? You can jump around on this recovery circle. Sometimes I even ask the client which ones they'd like to put on there, especially if they've read David's book. And we might jump around on the recovery circle as we go. So it's a perfect little framework that is super flexible, because formulas, I think that's one of the things people worry about with either Team CBT when they start to hear about it, because we have so many tools and so many steps, and they're like, this is like a big formula. And I just want it made really clear. The reason we have so many tools is because you may use certain tools at one point and maybe not others. Like, it's precisely the fact that there isn't some kind of cookie cutter formula that fixes everyone, why there's so many nuances, why there's so many tools, why it's pretty complicated in a lot of ways, because human beings are complicated. There's lots of nuances that we experience in life, and we want to make sure we are flexible in going where the client needs us to go and doing what works for the client, and not the thing that we just really like ourselves or we are really trained in or something like that. Okay. Probably pretty long. So let's summarize the agenda setting flow. Number one, step one, invitation. After getting an A plus in empathy. Number two, getting a specific moment in time with a daily mood log. Number three, miracle cure. What is the outcome? What's the goal the client wants to work toward? Four, addressing outcome resistance with the magic button, positive reframing dial. And five, addressing process resistance with the carrot, ultimatum, open hands, and recovery circle. The invitation is where motivation begins, not by pushing, but by putting the client in the driver's seat. And the recovery circle keeps hope alive through the process of finding the right tool for this particular client in this particular situation. So whether you're a therapist, coach, or doing your own growth work, sometimes the best way to move forward is to sit with open hands and give space for readiness to unfold while still honoring your values. I'll repeat. To understand positive reframing is the key to this whole video and addressing outcome resistance. So be sure to watch the earlier episode, How Values Create Resistance to Recovery. And if you haven't done it already, please watch that video next. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on agenda setting or assessment of resistance in the comments below, and have a great day.